Cameron's tax cut pledge to millions if he wins.
We will raise the threshold at which people pay the 40p rate. It is currently £41,900. In the next Parliament, we will raise it to £50,000.
By 2020, he says millions would pay less or no tax at all, but independent experts question his numbers.
Also tonight, a body is found in the Alice Gross investigation. It is now a murder inquiry. The main suspect is still missing.
Parents of the 15-year-old believed to have joined Islamic State in Syria talk of their pain.
And Hong Kong's pro-democracy protest spreads with boos for the authorities during National Day celebrations.
This is ITV News at 6:30 with Alistair Stewart and Mary Nightingale.
Good evening. David Cameron finally offered the electorate a prize for years of austerity. Tax cuts across the board, boosting prosperity, he claimed, for 30 million people. Further cuts announced yesterday would still have to be met, and it all hinged on the rather important matter of winning next year's general election.
But Mr Cameron has already run into difficulties. The Independent Institute for Fiscal Studies say his numbers don't add up. Well, in just a moment, our economic editor's take on that. But first, our political editor, Tom Bradby, on Cameron's election strategy.
He looked happy enough to be here, but there was no doubt this was a man who knows he's got a political fight on his hands. The election looms, and so he came armed with some cold, hard offers. Yes, the deficit had to be cut, he said, but that was in hand, and this would be the reward.
I can tell you now that a future Conservative government will raise the tax-free personal allowance from £10,500 to £12,500. That will take 1 million more of the lowest paid workers out of income tax, and it will give a tax cut to 30 million more. So with us, if you work 30 hours a week on minimum wage, you will pay no income tax at all. Nothing, zero, zilch.
And if that wasn't enough for the party faithful, there was this.
With a Conservative government, we will raise the threshold at which people pay the 40p rate. It is currently £41,900. In the next Parliament, we will raise it to £50,000.
He could promise all this, he said, because the deficit was being brought under control, and he couldn't resist a dig at his Labour opposite number.
He spoke for over an hour, but didn't mention the deficit once. Not once. He said he forgot to mention it. Look, Ed, people forget their car keys. My children sometimes forget their homework. I once even forgot that I left Nancy down the pub. Samantha, I'm sorry, it won't happen again. But let me say this, you cannot be Prime Minister of this country and forget the most important issue that we face.
He was pretty fired up by now, but not half as much as he was when he started to talk about the NHS and what he called Labour's lies.
I just think, how dare you? It was the Labour Party who gave us the scandal at mid-staffs. Elderly people begging for water and dying of neglect. And for me, this is personal. I'm someone who has relied on the NHS and whose family knows more than most just how important it is. Who knows what it's like when you go to hospital night after night with a sick child in your arms, knowing that when you get there, there were people who will love that child and care for that child just as like it was their own. And how dare they suggest I would ever put that at risk for other people's children? How dare they frighten those who rely on a National Health Service?
And it was, in the end, he said, a direct choice between Labour and Conservative.
If you vote UKIP, that is really a vote for Labour. And here's a thought. On the 7th of May, you could go to bed with Nigel Farage and wake up with Ed Miliband.
In recent years in these speeches, David Cameron has sometimes looked like a man who was enjoying power but couldn't always remember why he'd wanted it. But there was no doubt that he appeared fired up, even angry at times today.
He's back in Downing Street tonight. The only question, is it for months or years? Tom Bradby, ITV News.
So, just how generous then are the Prime Minister's announcements on tax? David Cameron says he wants to put fairness back into the system, giving those who work hard more money in their pockets. While our economics editor Richard Edgar has been examining the numbers.
Today's promises of tax cuts will make 25 million of us better off, say the Conservatives. But do the numbers add up? It's a complicated story. This morning they said a typical base rate taxpayer would pay £500 less in tax in 2020 than they do today. The independent think tank, the IFS, says that ignores inflation and the real cut would be more like £160. Mark works as a delivery driver for one of the big supermarkets in Glasgow. He earns just under £14,000 a year, plus in-work benefits. He's just the sort of person you'd think would be celebrating today's news, but not a bit of it.
No, I'll still be worse off. Still be worse. Probably to the tune of £750 a year. And things are harder off as it is.
The father of three says changes to his family's benefits would wipe out any tax cuts. Similarly, the Tories say raising the threshold of the 40p rate would make high-rate taxpayers over £1,300 a year better off. But again, the IFS says taking into account inflation, the real benefit would be £430 in today's money. But that's still good news for Andrew, a policeman earning about £43,000 a year, making him precisely the type of middle-income earner the Conservatives hope to attract.
We are quite fortunate, but that extra money would help us greatly, in addition to help a lot of other people as well in exactly the same position.
Vote-winning ploy or not, tax cuts still have to be paid for, and these would be very expensive.
We know that we've got tens of billions of pounds worth of spending cuts to come over the next Parliament to get the deficit back down to balance, which is what the Chancellor has said he wants to achieve. If you're going to put £7 billion of tax cuts into that mix, that makes what is already a really tough-looking job even tougher.
Income tax cuts like these are designed to appeal to the broadest number of people, voters. But whether they feel that the bigger picture adds up to make them better off is a very individual decision. Richard Edgar, ITV News.
Well, Tom told you that the Prime Minister was back in Downing Street, so he is as well. Tom, how are the Conservatives going to fund these tax cuts?
Well, Alistair, it's a very good question. I have absolutely no idea, and neither, I think, do they. I mean, they're clearly trading on what they believe is the economic credibility they've won the last 5 years. Ed Balls' point today is, look, if he'd come up with those figures last week, he'd have been laughed at. And I think in terms of, you know, making sure that we examine this properly, he has a bit of a point. His point being, listen, this is simply uncosted pie-in-the-sky promises and giveaways. And I think we just need to focus really on what the real truth of this week has been. You know, as you heard from the IFS there, sorting out the deficit, which is still enormous, in the way that George Osborne says he wants to do, involves billions and billions of pounds of savings to be found in government expenditure. We had the £3 billion announcement on the welfare freeze the other day, but that doesn't even come close to filling the £12 billion black hole that has to be filled. And then there is more on top of that for the last year in the cycle that no one is actually currently talking about. Throw in the cost of these tax cuts as well, and you really are looking at an enormous issue, a huge black hole. So we'll just have to see as time goes on whether this is really a promise or an aspiration.
Tom, thank you. And if you'd like to talk to Tom about David Cameron's speech, he's going to answer your questions on Facebook right now. That is facebook.com/Tom Bradby ITV. Just post your questions and he will answer as many as he can.
The discovery of a body late last night in Hanwell confirmed the worst fears of the family and friends of the missing teenager, Alice Gross.
33 days after she disappeared in West London, 2 police tents today surrounded an area by the riverbank. From West London, Paul Davis reports.
At the request of Alice's family, thousands of posters carrying the 14-year-old's face were taken down this morning. A family and the community in which they lived had dared to hope. This was the moment hope died.
It's just devastating news. We're such a close community. Sorry, it's really very sad.
The police tents alongside the water where the River Brent and Grand Union Canal converge indicated a tragic development in the month-long search, one so many had been dreading. A body had been found where it had been deliberately hidden beneath the water. Alice's parents had been informed.
This is now a murder investigation, and I need the public's help to find out whoever is responsible. I can confirm that significant efforts were made to conceal the body.
The police have cordoned off this area by the River Brent where the body was discovered. Alice went missing on the 28th of August. Walking past Hanwell Station, she then travelled alongside the Grand Union Canal. She was last seen at 26 minutes past 4, having walked back to Trumpers Way, a road that crosses the canal. This stretch of waterside is just a short walk from where Alice was last seen alive. Her bag was found just a few yards from here. It's an area that the police have searched on numerous occasions, and that appears to be a measure of the care that someone took to hide the body. Detectives still haven't been able to trace their prime suspect, Latvian Arnis Zalkans. He was captured on CCTV cycling on the same towpath shortly after the schoolgirl. Police say Alice and the 41-year-old builder would almost certainly have met that afternoon. Zalkans served a prison sentence for murder in his homeland. He's pictured here in handcuffs, pointing to where he hid his wife's body. Today, his victim's mother had a message of sympathy for Alice's parents. People say in time they'll get over it, but they won't. I didn't, she said. 14 years old, that's horrible. In West London, the grief of Alice's family is shared by thousands, like Lauren Wall and her mother Carol, who every day have walked their dogs past the spot where the body was hidden.
I've got 4 daughters myself, live in the area all my life, walk my dogs here all the time, my kids jog here. It's awful. I feel very, very, very sorry for them.
The posters have been taken down, but tens of thousands of yellow ribbons will remain for now in Alice's memory. We are still waiting for the official identification of the body that was recovered from the water just a few yards from here. Unusually in the circumstances, no one's in any doubt. I really can't overstate the impact this has had on a community here, the community that came together hoping against hope that there might be a happy outcome. Sadly for Alice and her family, we now know that that is not to be.
Paul Davis in Hanwell, thank you.
In the past few minutes, the Ministry of Defence has confirmed British fighter jets have been involved in a third set of airstrikes over Iraq. They bombed Islamic State fighters who were involved in heavy fighting with Kurdish warriors in northwest Iraq.
Here, meanwhile, the parents of a straight-A student feared radicalised by IS pleaded with her to come home today. 15-year-old Yusra Hussain disappeared from home a week ago and may now be trying to cross into Syria. From Bristol, Rupert Evelyn reports.
She's described as a typical teenager, but Yusra Hussain's actions are far from typical. Missing for a week, believed to have been radicalised, this child may by now have traded her love of table tennis for terrorism. Her family, hopeful that they can still prevent the 15-year-old from crossing into Syria from Turkey, say they're heartbroken and struggling with her disappearance. Her mother is desperate to have her home.
I love you so much, all your brothers and your sister. We miss you so, so much. The house is not safe when you left. Please, and please, Mom. Please, Mom. Look at me. Thank you.
A direct plea to her daughter. Perhaps it may get seen by her before it's too late, before she joins the ranks of other young British Muslims who've travelled to Syria, before she ends up on a front line in a fight against her own country. It's a notion her family are not ready to accept.
But we're not here to talk about ISIS. We're here to talk about Yusra, a 15-year-old girl. That's the point that we're here.
When Yusra Hussain left home, police were investigating a missing person. Based on her computer records and evidence that she travelled with a 17-year-old girl from London, her case is now being dealt with by counter-terrorism officers. And seemingly, 1 week on, no one is any closer to tracking her down. It may be too late to bring her home, but in the absence of concrete evidence, those who love this bright, bubbly girl will not let go of hope. Rupert Evelyn, ITV News, Bristol.
Still to come on the programme, defiance in Hong Kong as pro-democracy protesters defy a day of national unity.
That and more when we come back.
Welcome back. Pro-democracy protesters in Hong Kong today booed the national anthem at a ceremony to mark 65 years of communism in China. There was no sign of momentum flagging as demonstrations entered a sixth day. Our China correspondent Lucy Watson reports from Hong Kong.
Their Hong Kong, their protest and their vision for democracy, which continue to surge through this city. And these are the faces of this uprising, young outnumbering the old. Their commitment to this campaign spanning night and day, on the day that celebrated the founding of Communist China. The flag-raising Hong Kong's protesters jeered at. And their cause fascinates but baffles mainland Chinese tourists, but inspires others. Kenny Wu travelled here just to support it, but doubts its success. It's difficult to succeed when faced with the Communist Party, he says. Mainland Chinese wouldn't do this. They're too scared to tell the truth and protest. Unlike here, where unity has become power, and so many want to be involved. And tonight those numbers strengthened.
150,000 people have turned out today, all believing a compromise is possible. And it's a tactical move to keep these demonstrations peaceful. Yes, it makes Beijing uneasy, but if China wants to be considered a real global superpower, how can it possibly respond to polite protests with extreme violence while the world watches?
Li Jiuren is a chief organizer and a man with a clear agenda.
We may escalate our action to try to, would say, occupy more places.
So this campaign has direction. A new wave of actions planned as resolve hardens. Lucy Watson, ITV News, Hong Kong.
Here, the former Guantanamo Bay detainee, Mohsen Beg, walked free from Belmarsh prison today after terror charges against him were dropped. He had been held since February, but the Crown Prosecution Service dropped the case just 5 days before his trial. Ben Chapman reports.
Walking out of prison into a swarm of waiting journalists, Mohsen Beg ended his 8 months behind bars by immediately resuming his criticism of the government, who he says locked him up illegally.
I need to reconnect with my family again. I need to understand what it's like to be a free man. And I think it's important to point out some of the government's failures in its foreign policy and its internal policy. Its clear demonising of the Muslim community.
It's not the first time he's been imprisoned. He was detained in Pakistan in 2002 and held in Guantanamo Bay for 3 years, but never charged. He went to Syria in late 2012, returning in the spring. In February this year, he was arrested and charged with attending a terrorist training camp there. His release comes just 5 days before his trial, after police said new information came to light.
That entire area that's in front of us has now been mined by landmines.
His trips to Syria were no secret. Filmed here on the Turkish border, he says he was there helping civilians. His supporters claim his outspoken views are the real reason for his prosecution, but police today defended their investigation.
There's no question investigating terrorism offences in Syria is hard. And we are learning better ways of doing that all of the time. And those that we suspect of committing those offences, we will investigate.
But tonight, as Mohsen Beg returned home to his family, he says relations between the police and some Muslim communities have been badly damaged by his treatment. Ben Chapman, ITV News.
Finally, Stephen Fry has spoken to ITV News about his drug-taking past. He told Mark Austin that he regrets taking cocaine because it helped fund a world in which innocent people die.
I'm not proud of it, and the fact that yes, that I took drugs and therefore was to some extent giving money to Escobar and the cartels in Colombia is
in which
not something to be proud
young people
of.
die, poor people die.
In which young people die, in which poor people die. But if you want to go into that kind of morality, you know, we're all mixed in with a very, very ambiguous and ugly and unpleasant world. Every time we buy a pair of trainers, how sure can we be that it isn't child labour involved?
And you can see more of that interview with Mark and Ranveer Singh on News at 10 a little bit later. But from the two of us and all the team here, bye-bye.
Bye.